Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a look forward to this year's summer event and its big star, Summer Kama. If you're curious why I'm so early to the party, you can thank Not a Chemist for picking this as a stream goal way back in March of last year. So really, I'm just late to a different party now that I think about it. But that aside, Summer Kama is a 5-star Avenger introduced in this year's Chaldea Summer Adventure, an AoE Avenger at that. So will she take the crown from Space Ishtar, or will she fall by the wayside? Let's find out. Starting things off is Makara Floating, a 3-turn arts buff with a 2-hit evade. Skill names are tentative, by the way. As with a lot of these hybrid offense-defense skills, it's better for your mitigation to be multi-hit over single turn, which is the case here. So you just pop it right away, go to town, and hope Kama doesn't take too many hits in the process. Next up is Empty Demon. It's a 3-turn NP damage buff that also comes with an AoE charm, 100% chance at level 10, though given that a lot of servants have some degree of debuff resistance, it's not necessarily a sure thing. The benefit, if it goes through, is that Kama's NP deals extra damage against charmed enemies. This puts you in the position of deciding between getting the NP damage for all 3 waves of a given fight, or the extra damage on one of the later waves. Now before I get to skill 3, we should come to grips with Kama's noble Phantasm. Kama Sunyata is an AoE arts attack that reduces defense. Its overcharge effect deals extra damage to charmed enemies. 4 hits isn't game breaking, but it gets the job done. Possessing this allows Kama to engage in 3-turn farming with her good friend Castoria. As per usual, you just dump all of Castoria's buffs on Kama, use Kama's own relevant steroids, which may or may not include Empty Demon depending on your preference, and then go to town. To smooth out Kama's loops, she has the self-restoration passive to get a bit of extra charge at the end of every turn. But for waves where you still fall short, she can turn to her final skill, a Midsummer Seas Mara. It's a battery capping at 50%, something that's always appreciated in a farmer. It also comes with something called Flame of Love, which Kama applies on her regular attacks. Kama deals extra damage to enemies that have this debuff, and it stacks up to 10 times. However, the debuff itself only lasts for 3 turns, so don't expect it to get super high under normal circumstances. A stacking hit-based debuff? What the hell does that have to do with farming? I mean, I guess you can pre-card an enemy to get stacks on them before you NP. On farming nodes where you fall just a little short, that might be the play to make. In boss fights though, you'll probably still want to generate charge by putting cards behind your NP instead. And that last part is where the design of Kama's kit really starts to make sense, at least on paper. The charm being tied to the NP damage buff, the on-hit effect, and her NP reducing defense after it hits? She was meant to stay on the same target for an extended period of time. If there's a trio of major enemies or a single big boss with an ample supply of trash mobs, I can actually see Kama doing the trick, way better than someone like Space Ishtar. The problem, of course, is that historically, AoE anti-boss servants have a habit of being quite underwhelming since they usually can't loop, which makes them too restrictive to justify headhunting. But this is where Kama breaks the trend. She farms just fine while also maintaining that niche. Now, the niche isn't the most impressive thing on the world, but it is there. That said, her reliance on debuffs for extra damage has a pretty severe drawback. Those same boss fights often feature enemies with high debuff resistance or even blanket debuff immunity. So keep an eye out and understand that if you're suddenly bleeding damage, that's probably why. Either that or you picked a fight with a pack of moon cancers. I wouldn't recommend that either. As for how Kama stacks up to the other Avengers, she has the advantage of the second highest attack stat in the game. She falls just shy of Vanilla Jalter, meaning she's got a much bigger edge on both Space Ishtar and the recent JP servant Nidakris Alter. Her burst damage is substantially better too. At NP5 with all her on-demand buffs, Kama does around 19k more than Space Ishtar, and Nidakris is even further down the line. But that's just her burst damage. Remember that Space Ishtar accumulates NP damage buffs over the course of a run, so she hits harder and harder. Kama, on the other hand, is debuff reliant. If she kills her targets, the benefits end there. And because she needs a charm to get the most of her bonus damage, you have to choose between having the most damage on the boss wave and doing more consistent damage over a run. In effect, this puts pressure on you to raise Kama's NP level so she can raw dog the first 2 waves and save her charm for the 3rd. But there are ways of squeezing extra damage out of Kama, so you may want to give some of these a look before committing your credit card to the fight. First of all, Kama has an anti-lancer append. Given that you'll be using Kama as a generalist attacker, it's not the worst thing in the world. I'd still prioritize her starting charge append, but it's an option to keep in mind. Her appends each require 15 bells of absolution, so keep some handy if you plan to go for her. Your craft essence obviously matters, and on this front, Black Grail is the be-all end-all option. It boosts your damage output by a comical margin, and because it's an NP damage buff, you won't be feeling the absence of Empty Demon quite so much. Some other options include Ocean Flyer, a free craft essence introduced in the same event as Summer Kama. It has a cocktail of NP damage, arts performance, and starting charge that buffs your damage while giving you a little more leeway in your refund requirements. If you're an old player, you can even run Golden Sumo for an attack buff. Kama doesn't have her own, and while Castoria takes care of that for you, having the whole package by yourself isn't a bad thing either. Now there is one option I wouldn't go with, and that's her Bond CE. It increases damage against charmed enemies for your frontline. I wouldn't use this even on a meme charm team, and the reason is that Bonzi E's have abysmal stats. Get this. Remember Ocean Flyer? It starts at 500 attack and goes all the way to 2000 if you commit enough experience. Summer's Corruption set caps at 100. 100 versus 2000. This is the reason why you almost never run Bonzi E's on attackers. They need a comically overpowered effect to justify the upfront damage loss. Heracles, essentially. Mystic code-wise, you'll typically want to run Fragment of 2004, but if you opt for one of the swap codes like the Chaldea Combat Uniform, you can try to counteract one of Kama's biggest weaknesses, having to choose when you use her charm. What you do here is use Kama's own charm as early as you need, and then plug in a second charmer when you need to spike her damage a second time. Kid, Gil, and Alexander have charms that work on any single humanoid, and Alexander in particular can purge buffs with his. If you're specifically fighting men, Steno, believe it or not, becomes an enticing option. Not only can she charm men with her skill, but she can also give Kama an attack buff that doubles up on account of her divinity. And if you're willing to sacrifice your humanity, you can even equip Steno with a K-Scope for a second charm. Finally, there's Tamamo Lancer, who's expensive, rare, and has marginally less synergy than the other options. However, her charm doesn't have a miss chance, and it works on anything that isn't outright immune. So against enemies that are neither male nor humanoid, she's probably your best bet. Of course, if swapping is in the cards, then you should also consider one Mr. Oberon. He's an extremely high priority pick from this year, and while he doesn't provide any charm support, his massive damage buffs help inflict a far more debilitating effect, being dead. Now, I made a big deal about Space Ishtar's strategic flexibility, and it's pretty much impossible for an attacker to be as insulated from meta shifts as she is. I guess there's Shen Kong, but he solves that problem by running a bunch of high-end supports anyway, so it's not like he cares about who happens to be on top. My point is that we've gotten accustomed to Arts being top dog, and for practical reasons, Space Ishtar is currently an Arts attacker. But if, say, Koyanskaya ate the Chaos Emeralds and started throwing out massive buster buffs with 100% batteries and 4-turn cooldown reductions, Space Ishtar could easily switch gears. Kama can't hope to compete in that field. But Kama does have one very underrated aspect that gives her a high-end advantage. Her NP animation is extremely fast. She's like the Paul Bunyan of 5-star farmers, not to be confused with the actual 5-star Paul Bunyan. Now, this only applies to Kama's first and second forms, so you'll have to sacrifice some of her third ascension antics. But the upside is that if you're trying to min-max speed during hunting quests or lotto events, Kama has a decisive advantage in speed over the rest of her competition, and especially Space Ishtar. At media time the difference, and Kama is 5 seconds faster every NP. That adds up to quite a few additional runs over the course of an event. So if you're some kind of lunatic that goes for 1,000 boxes in a lotto event, that's a dramatic increase in efficiency. Not that I would know anything about that. For shits and giggles, I loosely timed Avengerito and got something in the ballpark of 10 and 11 seconds, compared to Kama's 9.5. So she actually measures up pretty well, just in case you were curious. For some odds and ends, I'd like to mention Korra the Demon King, which gives Kama blanket charm immunity. Pretty cool. Also, Summer Kama generally isn't well equipped to exploit command codes, but I can recommend Spear of Love, Action, and Wisdom. Flat stars and increased damage versus charmed enemies. If you can stand to take it off Assassin Kama, it plays nicely with her kit. If you're wondering what NP level to aim for, I'd consider at least NP 2 to be your starting point. NP 3 is also great if you can swing it. From experience, I can say that an NP 1 Summer Kama kinda sorta works, but you have to do a lot of fiddling, and those decisions about when to charm get a whole lot harder. Spare yourself the trouble and go for at least 2. Summer Kama is all about speed and burst damage. Space Ishtar is about adaptability and the snowball effect. But at the end of the day, they're both AoE farmers and damn good ones at that. Frankly, I'd just go for whoever's around at the moment. If you already committed hard to Space Ishtar or even Summer Musashi, then save your remaining quartz for the other fights to come. If you didn't, then either go for Kama or wait a year for Summer Ibuki. Thanks for watching. Like if you found this video helpful, subscribe for more, and come watch me on Twitch where I stream every weekend, 3 PM Pacific time, Friday through Sunday. This week I'll be doing some Grail Front and Lost Belt 7 depending on the day. I'll be throwing some rolls at our Land of the Lustrous collab. Twitch.tv/Finotaisen. Once again, thank you to Chemist, and I'll see you all there.